Kurt was a pathetic weakling who was satisfied with wasting away as a chore boy since he couldn't defeat a level 0 slime. When he got fired from his party, he wandered around doing any handyman job he could find. However, he soon awakened his potential as a legendary SSS-ranked adventurer capable of clapping everyone. It all began when the baddest adventurer group called Flaming Dragonfang arrived at a city to defeat an S-ranked Fenrir. Unfortunately, the monster popped up from where Kurt hid and faced the party, causing Bandana to move swiftly using her ropes to bind the beast. She however got yeeted and plastered on the wall like tomato paste, but their healer quickly healed her, allowing her to actually use her brain, this time to attack, which had her binding it to a tree. Just then, the leader Golnova swung into action and one-shot the monster with his flaming sword. As expected, they became heroes of the town, although Kurt was more or less an NPC chore boy. He admired his teammates with all his heart. Later on during dinner, Kurt was happily slaving away for his party members when Bandana randomly told him he was fired. When he tried to clarify, Golnova told him he was more useless than feelings are to a one-night stand. While the plastic surgery priestess added that since there was a max amount of 4 members per party, they needed to boot him to make room for a powerful mage if they were to move up in the world. The oblivious fool even begged them to let him stay, which earned him a rib-crushing kick from the redhead with anger issues. Now a nobody with just 3 coins to his name, he found himself in a town and went straight to a job agency building where he found an hyperactive receptionist ready to interview him. She began inquiring his basic details, and when she asked his experience, Bro forgot to cringe and added chore boy for Flaming Dragon Fang Party to his CV. Surprisingly, she claimed it was good enough, and then told him about the aptitude test, which measured talent granted by God. Normally talents were ranked from SSS rank to G ranked, and the differences were so glaring as D rank swordsmen might as well be holding a stick while in a rank can cut steel. Unfortunately, all of Kurt's talents were the lowest of the low, but he seemed to be aware already. Since he was more broke than my gold digger ex, she felt pity for him and asked him to lift some bags. When he did, they sucked his mana and were so heavy, and she claimed his strength was enough to work in construction. He was then recommended to an engineer who tried hard not to profile his skinny looks. He told how to mix cement and plaster the walls in 3 sentences before disappearing, but Kurt was so much of a hard worker that when it was time for inspection, he had finished a large portion of the wall on his own. The engineer had to scream in shock, but Kurt started apologizing, thinking he messed up again. He was told to stop working for the day and paid part for the work done, and the brokey who hadn't seen such an amount of money in his lifetime overdid it the next day, finishing the entire part of the wall on his own.
Stop it. Get some help.
This got him fired as the engineer claimed there won't be any more work for the poor workers to do if he kept working. He added that Kurt demonstrated SS-ranked skill, but Kurt just thought he did something wrong. He found himself back at the job agency where a client was looking for a miner, so he volunteered to take on the job. Once again, they told him to go fight with toy guns like the other kids, claiming he was too skinny to mine, but since the client herself was too broke to hire dwarfs, she settled for Kurt. Kershel, the receptionist, imagined how Kurt would be better off pimping at a brothel, which she would make sure to frequent, but she was cut short by her colleagues when she was handed Kurt's check of 200 gold from his previous construction work. She was so stunned that she tripped on the sandbags, which she soon learned were magic assessment tools that only got heavy when touched by people with incredible magic capacity, but didn't react to ordinary people like her. Back with the judgy client called Ulyssia, they arrived at their stop, which had only 1 tent, so Kurt pointed out he couldn't tempt the devil by sharing a small tent with her alone. He straight up rizzed her, causing her to blush like a tomato, so she tried to change topic by handing him his meal that made him so emotional since he was always the one cooking for people. At night, Bro couldn't sleep since his Bluetooth was trying to connect to her device, so he quickly went to sleep outside, not knowing that it was actually a test.
5 hours later.
When it was time to mine, Ulyssia told him they were supposed to start digging for ores at random, but Kurt told her they weren't clueless airdrop bots. So he volunteered to show off his skills, and in a few hours, they found a bunch of gemstones. Ulyssia suggested they sell them, but Kurt told her they would sell higher if he made them into magic crystals. This surprised her as only 10 magic craftsmen called Ateliers existed in the kingdom. But she became more astonished when he made one in less than a minute instead of the usual 1 hour it normally took. After he was done, Kurt stayed in the forest while she tried selling the crystal in town. However, since she couldn't say which Meister made them, she pulled her old royal family adventurer pass and got permission to teleport to the capital. There she met Mimiko, who would buy them secretly at 20 silver per piece, but on a closer look, she realized they had so much mana in them and offered to buy each piece for 10 gold instead. She immediately brought a sack of coins since the quality was so impressive, but she asked Ulyssia to first promise not to sell the crystals to anyone else, since an item like that in general circulation would cause a lot of problems. Secondly, she asked who made them, but Ulyssia refused to say. She asked why she was monopolizing someone that powerful for her gains instead of giving him to the kingdom, but even after using her authority as a court mage to force her, she refused to talk. Seeing that she wouldn't budge, she told Ulyssia to at least make sure he remained in the kingdom and gave an offer to become a royal baron or a count if he decided to work for the royal court. After then, Ulyssia went to the guild to investigate Kurt, but Kershal wanted to blab about confidentiality, so she pulled out her expired royal crest. There she learned that although Kurt had G-rank skills, he seemed to be extraordinary everywhere apart from combat. She also told Kershal to deposit the money for the crystals into Kurt's account before heading for the forest, the next morning, only to discover Kurt had built a cabin on his own overnight. It turned out it was normal for people to build houses overnight in Kurt's village, but she kept wondering if she was tripping since the maths wasn't mathsing. At the other end, the flaming dragon Fang were getting their butts handed to them by a freaking stick monster, so Golnova took out his frustrations on their new Sakura Sari teammate. Meanwhile, Ulyssia informed Kurt about the position in the royal court, but Bro rejected it, saying that he preferred being a small fry who gets ordered around and wished Golnova would take him back. At that point, she thought he got off from being treated like trash, but quickly changed the topic back to mining. She wanted him to rest only for him to reveal he was comfortable with the 6 hours of sleep he got. She began calculating how long it took him to build the cabin if he slept for 6 hours. However, he thought she was about to scold him, as he only got 4 hours of sleep in his former party, so he promised to make up for lazing around. Back at the forest, they went to mine separate areas, and while Ulyssia eventually found some loot for the first time in her life, she quickly dismissed the thought of asking Kurt to turn it into a magic crystal for free, since that would be exploitation. She went to check up on Kurt, where she found a new tunnel at the foot of a mountain. Once again, she was shocked at how one man could dig such a big hole by himself and wished he would drill hers too.
What do you mean by that?
Kurt soon showed up hurling a bunch of crates he called useless rocks, but she found them pretty and asked what they were, to which he responded they were worthless mithril. He claimed they were all over his village, which stunned her as she was aware mithril was more valuable than gold or platinum. This had her curious as to what he was mining for, so he showed her the tiny piece of orichalcum, which to her was a thing of legends. Once again, he claimed it was not so rare if a person can dig 7 kilometers into the earth. Away from the orichalcum, she couldn't take it when he told her he dug 7 kilometers and filled the hole back within 8 hours. She then saw a light at the end of the tunnel because, as it turns, Bro has mastered the art of drilling holes that he dug through the mountain on his own. Later on, the tunnel was commissioned as a trading route for merchants, with Ulyssia owning the toll permit. Meanwhile, Golnova was staining the town red with his shitty attitude and anger issues just because he realized Kurt's cooking was better than all the restaurants in town. He then told Bandana to bring his minion Kurt back to him, so she left knowing full well he would be arrested for being a nuisance. When she met with Kurt, she told him she was also fired from the party, although she didn't say she left since her secret mission had always been to monitor him. Kurt looked sad that the party was doomed like your online relationship. What did you say, nigga? And went on about how Golnova was his role model. Seeing that he was jobless, she pointed him to an Meister who needed some assistance, and he agreed to do the job. He soon arrived at the location where an elf girl answered the door. She immediately showed him to the kitchen that stinked more than a YouTuber's apartment, and he immediately realized he had to put on his chore boy shoes. Michelle, the elf girl, was then called by her mistress, leaving Kurt alone to transform the pigsty into paradise in a few minutes. With nothing left to do, he wandered around the mansion and found himself in a room with a girl with no plot armor. He immediately freaked out and introduced himself, so she recalled Lady Ophelia requesting help from outside. He also noticed a curse on the girl's stomach and asked for permission to examine it, which she agreed to. He noticed it was an advanced curse that had damaged her organs so badly and got an idea to prepare some soup to ease her pain. Meanwhile, Ulyssia met with Mimiko, who valued the useless mithril at 50,000 gold pieces. At that point, Ulyssia was more concerned about Kurt's safety, and Mimiko agreed that if word got out about his skill, he would surely be kidnapped. Back at the mansion, Lady Ophelia walked into Kurt cooking, so he immediately apologized for doing so without permission, adding that it was for the hungry girl he met. She immediately told him not to say anything about the girl he met, after which she paid him and told him to beat it. Immediately, Ophelia brought in the soup. She wanted to dive into it, but Ophelia was worried about it being poisoned, but she told her not to worry as she was already dying from a curse, so no one would care about poisoning her. As soon as she started eating it, she collapsed, which frightened Ophelia. However, she soon got up and revealed she had been cured totally. At the same time, the people who cast the curse realized it had been broken. They revealed she was Princess Lyslot and wanted to investigate properly before recasting the spell on her. That night, Ophelia took Lyslot to Mimiko and Ulyssia and revealed Princess Lyslot's identity. We'll leave out why she looked like a cheap 90s doll, as Ophelia would reveal she was cursed, adding that it could only be the handiwork of 3 suspects who wished to fuel war between the country and the princess's mother's nation. Mimiko then asked how they were able to break the curse, and she said it was Kurt's doing. Ulyssia couldn't understand how Kurt randomly healed and rizzed the princess when they'd only been apart for half a day. Meanwhile, Mimiko's suspect list included the first general named Sinova, Tristan Maynolf, the bishop of the Poland Church, and lastly the third Queen Isidora. Since they couldn't possibly confront these people head-on, Ophelia suggested they set a trap on Lyslot's 15th birthday. She explained how they'd create a fake Eitlier Meister who Lyslot would train under, forcing the culprit to investigate the Eitlier's identity. At the job agency, Kurt overheard a group arguing about quitting a job since their party was missing a member, so Kurt volunteered to help them out. Even the shrimp of the party talked down on him since they needed Gorilla Chan to help them carry what they would mine. They claimed he was too skinny to lift the bare minimum 200 kilograms, so he went on to lift both the shady-looking samurai and the heavily built tank, which earned him an applause from everyone. In the forest, the tank introduced himself as Kans, the depressed samurai as Danzo, and the shrimp-looking dead-weight caller herself Sina. Few moments later, Kurt's leg got stuck inside a slime monster, and his combat skill was so lower than your IQ that he couldn't defeat it when all Sina had to do was stab it easily. He started feeling useless again, but they assured him that just like Sakura, he could still get screen time despite being useless. He then recalled how his former party treated him and shed a tear due to the love he was now experiencing. Once in the dungeon, they noticed Goblin Dung, but Kans claimed they could handle 1 or 2 goblins, so they moved on ahead. Just then, they spotted a Globin and slayed it immediately, but it had already signaled the horde, which they clearly couldn't handle. Thinking of what to do next, Kurt found a secret passage, so they told Sina to go with him while they held off the goblins. However, when they went in, it became clear Kans and Danzo were sacrificing themselves for them to escape. Despite the situation, Sina summoned courage to forge ahead, only for her hopes to be shattered by a bunch of iron dragon golems in front of them. Back in town, Ulyssia took Lyslot around as they planned to make Kurt the fake Eitlier, but when they found his apartment, he wasn't in. Bandana then showed up to reveal that Kurt went mining with an adventuring party before disappearing. Taking a cue, they immediately headed for the cave, and since Lyslot was obsessed with Kurt, she used a bunch of skill to track Kurt until they stumbled on the battle. Immediately, Lyslot boosted Ulyssia's physical abilities before she dashed in to save the useless ballless men. In the secret cave, Sina had given up any hope for survival, however Kurt told her he could handle them. He then took a dagger and began hopping on parts of the dragons, dismantling them one after the other and dodging their attacks while Sina watched in horror. He went on to harvest the dragons and casually said it was normal to mine iron golems. By the time Ulyssia showed up to save the day, Kurt had already finished traumatizing Sina. Later on, Ulyssia told Kurt she would be working for a new Eitlier and wanted him to join her. She also employed his current party, so they all agreed to join in. Once in town, Kurt was invited to get his aptitude reassessed with Mimiko, and while he went to party with his new friends, Mimiko revealed that she told Kurt he was actually B and C ranked in random things, but in reality, all his abilities apart from combat were SSS ranked. She also added that his magic level was greater than hers as a court magician, and they were to keep his info a secret. However, Keishel happened to overhear them, so she freaked out thinking she would be silenced. Few days later, they boarded a carriage heading for the frontier city where the Atelier would be set up. While everyone made small talk, Sina thought she was Sherlock Holmes and assumed they'd been roped into some shady business. At the entrance of the city, Kurt became sad as he realized it was where he got fired in just 3 days after messing up fixing the wall. They soon arrived at an empty space which Ulycia declared was their new base, which had them totally confused. She added that they'll stay in an inn while Kurt would build the place on his own, shocking the F-rated adventurers. However, Kurt said he couldn't build it and the group immediately supported him, saying it was a totally outrageous request. But then he said he'd finish the place in 3 days instead. While they left Kurt to work, Ulycia sat the group down as it was obvious they had questions. Sakura the Smartass revealed to the other members how Kurt defeated the iron golems on his own like they were a bunch of Legos. She asked Ulycia what Kurt was, so Ulycia began by showing off her expired trophy again, while Lyslot introduced herself as the third princess. Cans was about to stand in awe, but she told them to treat her normally. They then assumed Kurt was royalty, but Ulycia explained that they had no idea about his origin, but knew about his SSS-ranked ability. She also told them Kurt was the Atelier Meister, although this had been hidden from him, so Sina protested, calling them deceivers and exploiters. Cans had to calm Sherlock down, so Ulycia cleared the misunderstanding, and they all agreed to help. Later in town, Danzo met up with Bandana, who now worked as an informant, and she told him how their former teammates Bibanok sold them out, hoping they'll become goblin fodder. After paying, Danzo went to the bar where the bald-headed monkey was planning his next mischief. He immediately bolted, but Danzo chased after him and made him swear not to involve himself with their party ever again. On the third day, everyone thought they were dreaming as Kurt had transformed the space into paradise. They wondered if it was CGI because not only was the mansion luxurious, how the hell did trees grow and bear fruit in 3 days? As expected, the silicon-brained princess didn't care and called the place her love nest with Kurt.
What?
The interior was even more impressive as he created a water generator, constant electricity, and made all the furniture on his own, as if flexing on Minecraft. When they asked where his room was, he said since he was a chore boy, he'd sleep in the store close to the kitchen. However, they couldn't have that, so they spent 2 hours convincing him to use the room he prepared for the absent Atelier Meister. The following day, he prepared the best breakfast for the group, but he wasn't there to join them in the feast. Ulycia was told he was cleaning some graffiti on the walls, and since it was her ward against curses, she hurried to stop him, but he'd cleaned them all already. Of course, she couldn't tell him they were wards since he didn't know anything about an assassination. Instead, she told him there was a graffiti artist obsessed with Lyslot, and he bought it just like the lies your partner feeds you during pillow talk. Meanwhile, plastic surgery priestess Marlefus was to be thrown out of the church since she assisted Golnova's disgraceful actions. The obese Bishop Tristan told her she had one chance to redeem herself and gave her a cup of wine to drink, which she did. However, it was laced with the same curse he used on the princess, so he gave her a mission to eliminate Lyslot, the third princess, adding that there's a timer that would end her in a few days if she failed. What he didn't tell her was that he'd already contracted a demon who was going to use her magic powers as a conduit. The following day, Ulycia couldn't stop worrying about their safety since the wards were gone. When she asked Kurt if he could make a barrier for Lyslot's room, he claimed he couldn't since he'd already protected the entire mansion with a barrier for curses. At the same time, the enemy instructed their strongest curse user to attack Lyslot. However, when he did, Kurt's barrier reflected it back to the caster, making him glow like a freaking light bulb. On hearing about Kurt's barrier effect, Ulycia excused herself, leaving Kurt alone with Lyslot. He asked her to head to the market with him, but she turned him down while trembling in fear. That night, the engineer who happened to be the general of the city was standing guard on the wall when he noticed a horde of skeletons about to attack the city. Just as Ulycia and her team found the curse user still glowing after he was ditched by his comrades, Mimiko got a message from her intelligence about the incoming monsters. However, the general who was preparing to attack watched in awe as the skeletons got purified as soon as they touched the wall. Mimiko also got the information and Ulycia immediately figured out it was Kurt's doing. Meanwhile, Marlefus had been milked dry by the demon who didn't want to stop and suggested she used her soul as fuel to keep summoning monsters, and at that point, she knew the Golden Grill's obese fool had screwed her. Later on, Ulyssia explained the situation to Kurt and said she planned to attack the ruin which was the source of the monsters spawning. She then went to get one of Kurt's high-grade magic crystals before meeting up with the general called Allraid along with Mimiko and Ophelia. Ulyssia proposed her plan to attack the ruin and even showed him her trump card, but he was still dissatisfied and insisted he went with her while Generic, his vice-general, leads a decoy group. Meanwhile, Kurt was feeling useless and uneasy and causally started making a dagger to take his mind off things. After finishing up, he called the sword a failure, but Lyslot happened to walk in, and since she liked it so much, he let her have it. He also noticed she was trying hard to smile and so wanted to ask her something. She thought he'd ask something romantic and started daydreaming, but he asked if her life was in danger, and she opened up that the monsters were after her. He recalled how Golnova liked making graffiti in caves and figured out Ulyssia must have gone there too since she told him something about an obsessed graffiti artist. So he told Lyslot that they would defeat the graffiti enemy together. At the gate, Ulyssia used the crystal to dispatch the monsters ahead, but it seemed more powerful than they'd anticipated. While the decoy moved out, they went on foot into the forest, only to be overwhelmed by a lot of monsters from all directions. A few hours later, Lyslot got ready, and since Kurt told her the knife activated a spell, she started waving it around like it was the Elder Wand. Meanwhile, Ulyssia and Allraid were still pushing their way through the monster who were spawning like ants in an anthill. While she was busy worrying about the diversion squad, Allraid got stabbed, which distracted her further, allowing some ugly demon monkeys to team up on her. Kenz then showed up from nowhere to save her along with Danzo and bleached Sakura, who was mouthing off like she was the one that found the ruin. Just then, Ulyssia used the last of the magic crystals to clear the path to the entrance, and before they went in, she handed Allraid one of Kurt's soup that healed him instantly, much to his shock, while the others told him it was normal. Together, they headed into the cave while slaying anything that dared attack them, and at the same time, the demon was enjoying milking every essence of Marlefus's soul. With his magic, he watched as Generic used the crystals to delete his monsters from existence. He also realized that Ulyssia's team was approaching, so he went to face them himself since he was bored. When they got to a hall, they used a magic crystal on some small fries, only for the embodiment of ugliness to show up as the last boss. For some reason, Ulyssia wasn't scared of the Demon Lord and moved to attack with the magic crystals. However, it was like some pretty light show to the guy who claimed it would not be enough to exorcise him once. He claimed he had infinite life so that he didn't bother dodging Allraid's attack, and indeed they watched him regenerate spontaneously. To frustrate them further, he showed them everyone suffering to protect the town and summoned even bigger monsters to bully them. The duo immediately chipped off his head, but he simply picked it up and fixed it like a light bulb, while jesting about how he'd rearranged the princess's innards like a world puzzle while they watched. At that point, Ulyssia was confused, knowing full well nothing they'll do would work. The Demon Lord was busy enjoying their fall into despair when Kurt Lyslot dug their way into where Marlefus was uninstalling slowly. She thought he had already figured out she was part of the assassins, but when Lyslot asked Kurt who she was, he claimed she was just a normal ex-party member. She had to confess what happened, but Kurt's brain kept thinking she was simply the graffiti artist and nothing more. The idiot completely ignored the villain and asked for the whereabouts of Ulyssia, which Marlefus pointed out for him, but instead of going, Lyslot offered to go in his place and told him to clean the graffiti Marlefus was lying on. She managed to convince the pea-brained idiot to stay behind, while Marlefus called him stupid in various forms for attempting to erase a magic circle with a mop only for it to actually work. Immediately, the demon noticed what had happened. It dodged the duo's attack as Marlefus was the source of his power. The smart-ass Ulyssia was about to use the magic crystal on him, but he hit it out of her hand instantly. To make matters worse, Lyslot showed up for free like it was Black Friday, so she got struck in the chest before anyone could react. As the demon was celebrating his free coupon, her corpse turned into butterflies as she revealed Kurt's sword had the power of confusion and could create illusions. He tried to attack again, but Lyslot made another butterfly clone, while her real body broke the magic crystal, which created a light that sent him back to the depths of hell, along with all the monsters he summoned across the land. Once the monster was gone, Ulysses scolded Lyslot for offering herself to the enemy like a fool before they both thanked her for saving her life. Below, Marleifs was thinking about how she'd still die from hunger due to the curse, and when Kurt gave her food, she took it with the intention of tasting Kurt's fantastic cooking before dying. As expected, it was so sweet that it took some time before she realized the food had not only cured her depression, but also erased her curse as well. This made it clear that Kurt was the one saving their butts the entire time, and she burst into tears and apologized to Kurt. It was about to be a sweet reunion until Mimiko's ninjas dragged Marleifs away, and although she thought Kurt would save her, the oblivious boy just promised to gift her sliced grapes in prison. Together, they headed back to the city with everyone safe and sound, and Kurt admitted he was having fun for the first time in his life. That night he made lots of food for the injured knight, but he got worried they didn't like it, and even offered to make a more appropriate dish. However, Allraid assured him they loved it so much they focused on eating instead of talking. Lyslot also introduced Kurt to Allraid, who he initially thought was the engineer, and as they watched the fireworks, everyone noticed their wounds had healed, to which Kurt casually said was a normal thing to heal while eating.